Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good evening. I'm not sure why. Good evening, all. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Newman Center. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good evening. Welcome to the Newman Center. Good evening. My name's Ed Cave, and I'm the Director of Fund here at the UB Newman Center. If this is your first time with us, you have a very hearty welcome, and we hope you come again. If you are a member of the Newman Center, hello. If you would like to be a member of the Newman Center, please see me later. Tonight, we are streaming the presentation to help those who might be unable to attend, as well as an international audience of those in other states. We have received requests as well from our Newman community who are traveling in Ireland, England, Greece, Turkey, the Caribbean, France, and Canada. We wonder who it is from Canada. We wish you well and safe travels to the Newman community. You are in the Great Hall. On the weekends, we celebrate Mass here, Saturday at 5 o'clock, Sunday at 9 and 10:30 a.m. During the academic year, we celebrate a Mass on Sunday at 6:30 p.m., often referred to as the Student Mass, sometimes for us as the Last Chance Mass. In addition to the student mass during the academic year, on Wednesday evenings, we have a student dinner where UB students enjoy a terrific meal and a chance to meet new friends. Please help me thank Bob Shores for his mood-setting music. Thank you, Bob. Also deserving thanks is John Blearsh for setting up each week. Thank you, John. Jean Powers, Nellie Drew, and Jan Schneider deserve our thanks for helping with our hospitality. And to our campus minister, Leah Merlo, who, for her help in so many ways, for being here each week to help with technology, and we hope she brings her baby boy with her next year. One more person deserving our thanks is my lovely wife, Veronica. She does all the shopping for the goodies we enjoy each week and helps set up. Thank you, Veronica. Some upcoming events here at the Newman Center. We have our infamous and famous chicken barbecue. It'll be held here Sunday, August 14th on the Newman Center campus. Tickets are on sale. You can get them after each Mass on the weekends and during the week here from the office. The committee is looking for items for gift baskets for the auction. Please be generous with that. I also have information on Father Pat's New England trip from October 7th to the 10th. That's a long weekend in October. Please see me for information if you're interested. There will be a question and answer period following tonight's presentation. We will have 2 mics. Please raise your hand if you would like to ask the speaker a question, and we will quickly as possibly get a mic to you so everyone can hear your question, especially those overseas. Tonight's speaker is the Executive Director of the UB Newman Center, priest to thousands, friend to all, our speaker, Monsignor J. Patrick Keeler.
Be here today and talk about this subject that's been on my mind for about 6 months in relationship to all the other stuff that's going on. So thanks for all the speakers this summer. They've been very enlightening, very exciting, very exciting. Oh my. The famed futurist R. Buckminster Fuller considered Vatican Council II to be one of the 3 most important things of the 20th century. One other one was the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous, and and the other I don't know, but he thought Vatican II was one of the most important things of the 20th century. Buckminster Fuller was a man of many hats. He was a poet, he was a philosopher, he was an inventor, he was a mathematician, an architect, noted for the famous geodesic dome, although he never was licensed as an architect because he either dropped out or was kicked out of Harvard, but he was honored with a license at age 60. But one of the things that I admire most about Buckminster Fuller is he was a futurist. In fact, and he may be the one who invented the word, I don't know. I delightfully recall the late Magda Cordell McHale. Anybody remember Magda? Magda McHale. She was a UB's well-known futurist. She was actually a friend of Buckminster Fuller, and remember that book, Future Shock, a few years ago? The author of that, they were very good friends. I had the profound delight and experience to know and to have dined with Magda a number of times. Her presence itself was an experience. She died around 93 years old. And it's exactly that which we will somewhat center the source and the direction of tonight's remarks. What is the future of Vatican II? It's a strange question 60 years ago. What was hidden? What's its hidden, unfulfilled content? What was contained in all of its words? The direction, the message communicated, the news brought home, not simply the documents as varied and as they were and as they are, but the hidden message of Vatican II for the future, contained in that drizzling Thursday morning, St. Peter's Basilica, Vatican City, nearly 60 years ago, on October 11th, 1962. I was in the seminary at the time. By the way, that day, October 11th, is now the feast day of St. John the 23rd. We gathered at the seminary in the middle. I was my first year in the major seminary. We gathered in the middle of the night because we wanted to start exactly when the council was starting. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And we had Mass in the seminary theater building at the same time the council opened. We had actually been quite excited. I mean, this is 1962. This is 60 years ago. We were actually quite excited since the seminary was new, the faculty rather young and recently educated, many not much more than 40, and most of them fresh from their studies. Nellie Drew, who gave one of our early brilliant lectures this summer, noted early in this year's Bridge Lecture Series, focusing on the heart of the Title IX message, she quoted the basic message, not digging into all the commentary, of which there's so much. Tonight, I'm going to try to do the same. Based on perhaps one of the most important discourses of the 20th century, the opening words of Pope St. John the 23rd, that early morning were something different. They were certainly ecclesiastical, somehow Vatican style, formal as to be expected, but something more, something deeper, something embraceable. The very opening words. Today, the Holy Mother Church is blessed because, thanks to a singular gift of divine providence, has already dawned that day, so desired, when the Second Vatican Council is solemnly inaugurated here, next to the tomb of St. Peter, under the protection of Mary, whose divine maternity is celebrated liturgically this very day. The succession of the various councils, both the 20 ecumenical councils and the innumerable provincial and regional ones, clearly proclaim the vitality of the Catholic Church and stand out as luminous milestones throughout its history. He gave the speech in Latin, but insisted that when it was released, it should be released in Italian, so they would understand it was all his and nobody else wrote it for him. Gaudet mater ecclesia. Gaudet. Let's be joyful. It's a wonderful. What's his name? Pope Francis used that word gaudium. It's one of his encyclicals. Optatissimus iam dies. It looks the most. Not the superlative adjective. The most wished for day has been brightened. Manifest the vigor, vigorem, quasi fulgentia lumina, as a bright, bright shining light. I would like to point out, delightfully, I've read the talk many times, I would like to point out three things that stand out. I think today I stick with threes tonight. Everything is three. First, the language itself. It's engaging. You'll hear some of those words. It's intelligent. It's respectful. Added marks of intimacy and personal encouragements. Features which you can only see after you've read it a few times. Most papal readings, papal speeches, demand a second reading anyway, but more for reasons doctrinal or academic. You don't look for that in this speech. Second, Pope John's words are pastoral. The main task of this council is not, therefore, the discussion of this or that theme of the fundamental doctrine of the Church, repeating diffusely the teaching in ancient modern fathers and theologians, which is very well known to you and that you are so familiar with. For that, a council was not necessary. The Christian and Catholic spirit of the entire world waits to go one step further. He's so gentle. Toward a doctrinal penetration and a formation of consciences that is more perfect in correspondence with authentic doctrine. Using the literary formulas of modern thought. When I was a kid in the seminary, we weren't allowed to even think of evolution. One thing is the substance of the old doctrine, of the deposit of faith, and another the way to formulate its expression. In this we must take great account, with patience if necessary, by adhering to the norms and requirements of a teaching of a predominantly pastoral nature. And even more clear about errors. Frequently, the Church condemned them with the greatest severity. In our time, however, these are his words, the bride of Christ prefers to use the medicine of mercy rather than severity. She wants to come to meet current needs, showing the validity of her doctrine rather than renewing sentences. In such a state of affairs, the Catholic Church wants to show itself a kind mother to all, patient, full of mercy and kindness for the children separated from her. And thirdly, one of the things that's so clear about Pope John the 23rd, his insistence on optimism, despite all the work that had to be done. There is, in addition, another argument, venerable brothers, that is convenient to entrust to your consideration. To increase then even more our holy joy, we want to propose the consoling examination of the happy circumstances in which the ecumenical council begins. So we want to start on the right foot. So he warns, in the daily exercise of our pastoral ministry, sometimes come to our ears, hurting them, certain insinuations of some people who, even in their ardent zeal, lack the sense of discretion and measure. They know who they are, too. They do not see in modern times but a prevarication and ruin. They are saying that our time, compared with the past, has been getting worse and behave as if they learn nothing from history. Pope John was a graduate student of history, which remains a teacher of life. And if in the time of the preceding councils, everything had proceeded with an absolute triumph of doctrine, it seems fair to disagree with these prophets of calamities. I think the earlier translation at the time was prophets of doom, trained to announce unfortunate events. Isn't that wonderful? We're going to train you guys to announce unfortunate events as if the end were imminent. In this present historical moment, Providence is taking us to a new order of human relations. Even among human adversities, Providence arranges adversities for the good. And then in his almost closing words, the council that begins appears in the church as a promising day of shining light. Scarcely its dawn. Tantum aurora est. Tantum is one of those words in Latin it's so rich, it means 1,000 things. Tantum aurora est. But already the first announcement of the day that arises, how softly it fills our hearts. Everything here breathes holiness. Everything arouses joy, for we contemplate the stars, which with their clarity increase the majesty of this temple. And all of this because the entire council came to Pope John as an unexpected surprise, grace. As for the initiative, he continues, of the great event that gathers us here today, it is enough with a simple title of historical orientation to reaffirm once more our humble but personal testimony of that first moment in which unexpectedly our heart and our lips burst forth simple words, ecumenical council, pronounced before the College of Cardinals that very fateful day in January of 1959. It was an unexpected touch, a ray of light, a great sweetness in the eyes and in the heart, at the same time a fervor that suddenly awoke all over the world, awaiting the celebration of the council. When Pope St. John gave those words, he was 80 years old, and he would die with almost a year later, a little over a year later. He was known after that as Il Papa Buono, the good Pope. So Pope John's spirit was the starting spirit of the council, which lasted 3 years until December 1965, when it was closed by Pope St. Paul VI. But I've been thinking about, where is the council before this? How did it get here? I have on and off for many years a love of the 19th century. In a book by E.E.Y. Hales, British historian and convert to the Catholic Church, which I read in the seminary, The Church in the Modern World. Some of you may have read that book. I think it was probably in Canisius College and places like that. Subtitled, The Church in the Modern World, subtitled, A Survey from the French Revolution to the Present. Whew. Published 1960. But because of the realization that Vatican II was its future, the future of the 19th century is Vatican II. We've already mentioned Buckminster Fuller. He was born near its end. Pope John the 23rd was born in 1881. And then you think of all the philosophers and scientists whose future we are. We are their future. So there are three instances I would take for the future of Vatican II. These are important, I think. This quote is from one of the books which inspired my reflection tonight, a recent one on Catholic theology and French politics, entitled Soldiers of God in a Secular World by a Notre Dame professor of history called Sarah Shortall. These are the opening words of the book. Think Pope John in 62. On the morning of June 30th, 1880, gendarmes arrived at the Jesuit scholastica of Laval to dissolve the institution and evict the 155 students and teachers. Splintering into small groups, the Jesuits took shelter in the homes of local people for a few months before making their way to Saint-Malo, where they set sail for the island of Jersey. Most religious orders had the same fate as the Jesuits, including the Dominicans, who moved their house to Spain for a while and then to Caen in Belgium, just across the border. And they did that in 1904, but they had been in Spain, I think, before that. By the time the French Republic officially proclaimed the separation of church and state in 1905, roughly 30,000 religious had been driven into exile. What few at that time could have predicted, however, was that these two exiled seminaries, the Maison Saint-Louis in Jersey and Le Sauchoir in Belgium, would become the cradles of a revolution in Catholic theology. So wonderful, jeez. And play a key role in modernizing the church and would eventually inspire many of the changes that were brought about by Second Vatican II in the 60s. The second influence of the 19th century is, of course, the back wall there, John Henry Cardinal Newman, St. John Newman. The great British historian Eamon Duffy puts it quite simply. Newman combined a lifelong insistence on the reliability of revealed truth with a vivid awareness of the contingency of all Christian understanding and utterance, even the most solemn creeds. in his consequent exploration of the legitimacy of the development of doctrine, his rejection of a narrow Enlightenment understanding of rationality, his recognition of the puzzle and difficulty of believing God while simultaneously defending the reasonableness of religious commitment, his understanding of the dynamic values of the institutional church and the impossibility of near and tidy harmonizations of competing demands of truth, and our consequent need and ability to live with the inevitable tensions between them. This is about the 1860, maybe, 1850. For the first time, a major Christian thinker had confronted head-on the radical contingency of Christianity as an historical phenomenon. He acknowledged that doctrine, ritual, and church organization all change over time and in changed cultural context, while still maintaining the integrity and objectivity of the revelation which those doctrines exist to articulate. For those reasons, Duffy calls Cardinal Newman our contemporary. Recent book he wrote. His name was seldom invoked during the debates of Vatican II, but some of the key theological and ecclesiological concerns derive ultimately from his example, most obviously the recognition given to the role of the laity in the sensus fidelium, in the life of the sensus fidelium is the, can 40 million Frenchmen be wrong, you know, and the formal acceptance of his idea in the paragraph 8 of the Constitution on Revelation. 19th century, wow. And the final observation is the century itself. The papacy from Pius IX to Leo XIII was highly significant. First of all, Pius IX was crazy about the modern world. He couldn't stand the modern world. A lot of things were happening in the beginning of the 19th century. He revolted against modernity. The church changed from Pope Pius VII anointing Napoleon as emperor in the Cathedral Notre Dame to Napoleon crowning himself there. Put the crown on his own head, clarifying the new place of the church. Much of the same followed in Germany under Bismarck. Isn't the Wreck of the Deutschland, that famous poem by Hopkins, that's because the Bismarck threw out the nuns out of Germany. What were those laws called? I forget. But it's the same time, and then they all they got it in the Wreck of the Deutschland, which is right off the coast of England. That great poem of Hopkins. In Italy, the Pope lost the Papal States. And the whole middle of Italy was the Papal States. Gone. The result of that breakdown was Vatican I. And the effort, Pope Pius IX said he wanted to restore the papacy, and infallibility, as you all know, came then. And a condemnation of the modern by the famous syllabus of errors. It was a doctrine of Pius IX. Here's some of the errors. Protestantism is nothing more than another form of the same true Christian religion in which form it is given to please God equally as in the Catholic Church. That's an error. Here's another error. Human reason, without any reference whatever to God, is the sole arbiter of truth and falsehood and of good and evil. That's an error. The church ought to be separated from the state and the state from the church. That's an error. I love this one. The Roman pontiff can and ought to reconcile himself and come to terms with progress, liberalism, and modern civilization. Another error. That was 1864. Vatican I opened in 1869. It was planned, it was started, the thought came in 1864, and ended the following year before the return from the summer break from the bishops to come. When in September, Rome was invaded and the Papal States gone. This broke down the role of the church with the Third Republic in France, church and state separated, and the church was literally in exile, concretely. Now, the recent biography of Pius IX. Needless to say, he wasn't appropriate for the job. The biographer of Pius IX, I think, was Hans Kung or Gregory Baum in the Modern Library Biography series. He's very harsh on him. I think he calls him mentally unable. So anyway, Pius IX's follower was the great Pope Leo XIII, who was one of 7 or 8 kids. He was a much different sort of person. He used a different approach. So all of these philosophies and all these things are happening all over Europe, and the Pope is the Pope of the Church. He said, what we need to do is put it all together. So he turned back in his famous Aeterni Patris, I think the name of it is, in his famous encyclical, to return to the systematic theology of St. Thomas Aquinas, which is a system. It's a system. Let's keep us in the same book. And he also did a wonderful turn toward the working man, the influence, by the way, of the U.S. bishops. So by then the seminaries settled in, and that was the heart of everything that was taught. Let's get it all together, so we'll teach Aquinas. But also at the time, I'm thinking of the seminary in Jersey, the St. Louis, where the Jesuits were. The teachers were very, very strict, but the students were wondering about it. But then in World War I, even though they had exiled all of the religious, they were all drafted back because they were French citizens in World War I. So the Jesuits, and also the Dominicans, who were in Jersey, were drafted and served there. But most of the Jesuits were recruited from the upper class echelons of French society. So they didn't know anything about the workers that they served with. It was a revelation. I had an uncle who died in the First World War. I often think of my mother's talking about him. One of them says, they were men, these are guys that were surprised. They were men of courage, of loyalty, of generosity, of intelligence, of integrity. They didn't know that about them before. One of them, who became a real asset to the church in France in World War II, wrote, that experience opened our eyes. And when the war ended, there were among us Jesuits those who resolved that we would never again allow ourselves to be cut off from the real world in which we lived. How could we be witnesses to the gospel to the men of our times if we didn't know those times and those men? Pope John the 23rd was a chaplain in the First World War. And some of you can remember, perhaps, Bishop Joseph Aloysius Burke. Remember Bishop Burke? Does anybody remember his confirmations? I do. I've been to a lot. Huh? You remember? He was a little guy, about this tall, maybe this tall. He used to go and open the seminary. He always had the same homily.
When I was a soldier and chaplain in the First World War in Belgium,
He was in Belgium.
I was often asked, what has the church done for the working man? I'll tell you, the church has shed her blood for the working man.
So anyway, the first... Thank you. Anyway, Bishop Burke was the first native bishop of Buffalo. He was the first Buffalonian to become bishop here. So these men were changed. One of them says, what would have happened if we hadn't gone to the war? We wouldn't be doing this now. So the effect was quite profound. Many of them returned to parishes and they tried to form communities and things like that. But one of the great movements, some of you remember from that time, was the worker priest movement, Prêtre au travail, the working priest. The first worker priest was a Dominican, Jacques Lowe, who became a dock worker in Marseille. How can we preach the gospel to people we don't know what they're about? How can we baptize a civilization if we can't be present to it? So it was supported by the Archbishop of Paris, very strong, Cardinal Xxiii. He supported these guys, and they had the great theologians of these exiled seminaries were people who like Yves Congar and Marie-Dominique Chenu and Danielu and Ratzinger was even studied all of these kinds of things that emerged. So that was the formation. They were ordered out. They were shut down finally in 1954, and the reason was. Two reasons clearly. The first one was they're with the workers. Guess what? We don't get paid enough. Let's start a union. We don't do that. We can't have a union. So they got in trouble with the factories, called the bishops and said, get them out of here. And the second reason, I think, is, this is post-war France. Lots of things. It was the Vichy government, which was pro-Nazi. And against that were the communists. And so many of the communists were in the factories, and they became very good friends of the communists, which, of course, can't be friends of communists. So it was very scary for the church at the time. So they ordered them out. But that was the formation of those writers of the significant proposals of Vatican II. Those people who had the experience of the dominance of Thomism, and which the Dominicans were able to somehow translate, but the Jesuits didn't go for that. Okay. So Vatican II, the 4 sessions, they delivered in work and word and spirit are the past to our future. So as those were the past to the council. The council is passed to us. I think of the letters from Vatican City, which appeared during the council in the New Yorker magazine. Many of you, I'm sure, read them. Written by Xavier Rinn. It's a pseudonym for Father Francis X. Murphy, who was a theologian living in Rome at the time. And after he was unmasked, he admitted he didn't want he admitted that he was really Xavier Rinn. But he told him he admitted it because he didn't want the Jesuits to take credit for the book. And he was a Redemptorist. He didn't want the Redemptorists to have a chance to deny it. Adding the best, Xavier was his middle name and Rinn was his mother's maiden name. And he added that his mother's name would then be known worldwide. It was her maiden name. Anyway, I just think that's so much fun. It's a book worth reading again. So let me express 3 steps of the future of Vatican II. So this is the future of Vatican II. So just like the 19th century produced it, what did Vatican II produce? The first is Gustavo Gutierrez. Oh, where are they? Look at that. He was born in Peru in 1928. He's now still living. He's 94 years old. His studies ended him up in Europe, where he studied in Belgium and France. Actually, he was a student of Congar and de Lubac. Lubac was the famous Jesuit, and Congar, the famous Dominican. And he studied them, and he went back to try to do what was called the Nouvelle Théologie, the theology that came out of this reaction against the First Vatican Council. He's a Latin American, so you can see the connection. Pope Francis. He has 3 things. Wow. To announce the gospel is not the intellectual delight of reflection, but communication. It's not just orthodoxy. All of my seminary nightmares come back. It's not just orthodoxy, but it's orthopraxis. It's doing it. Words and actions. And then in the present time, see, in Latin America, the priests have that connection with the poor that the Jesuits and the Dominicans did. In the present time, it's to see the preferential option for the poor, so that when he says, when some people say, blessed are the poor in spirit, they say, lucky. You're lucky you're blessed. No, he translates in a whole different way. Poverty is a curse, he says. And 3, by sharing an experience of being loved by God. And so it's a passionate interior life that has to be shared. The second result of that Vatican II, I think, is just, there could be a lot. I chose 3. Brother Gabriel Moran, whom I met more than 50 years ago and have read on and off throughout the years. And perhaps the main 3 things he did was open for us the nature of what we have traditionally called revelation. He wrote 2 very great books, one called The Theology of Revelation, another book worth reading, and The Catechesis of Revelation. It's an understanding which he himself wrote a number of books about, and each one correcting the mistakes that he made in the earlier ones. It's pretty humble. As he described to discover the basis of church teaching, and in his final book, completed shortly before his death a couple years ago, saying that, quote, the tradition of the church understood not as truths accompanying the Bible, but as a totality of church history, including the Bible. No individual knows the entire tradition. As a result, it is indispensable for the church to draw upon the saints and scholars who best know the history and practice of the church. And to Newman would add, of course, the laity, and that's what the synod is about. Secondly, the church is to form a community which listens both at the local level, it seems to be the direction of the road to renewal, and the formation of families, and then the church becomes a community of communities. He said one of the corrections he would make about one of the phrases that comes from the declaration on the church, the people of God, we use that expression, the people of God. He said, I'd prefer to use the people of Christ in sight. And finally, and for Americans, his recent book, What Happened to the Roman Catholic Church, What Now?, is a clarification helping us understand the culture wars, the culture conflicts that split American in light of the teaching of the present Pope. Very good. It's very good. I saw somebody walking who had read it as well. The third person, of course, of the presence of the council future is Sister Joan Chittister. She's coming here in September, who is actually coming to be with us in September, of whom I will only say has joined the growing number of people who have made religion, prayer, religious life, and being a Catholic acceptable. If you've ever heard her, she gets standing ovations. Having just returned from Australia, where she was present at the National Synod, spoke in many, many countries, his international presence draws crowds wherever speaking, and written hundreds of articles and dozens of books about her religion and its effects, and keeps on going at age 86. She and Pope Francis were born the same year, which represents clearly the future that Vatican II could never have expected, and now will provide us with a future which we might never expect ourselves. In a sense, Pope Francis became Pope John's future. Another Il Papa Buono. Since Sister Joan is so quotable, I have to add a quote from her, which is right appropriate. The desert monastics tell the story of Abba Arsensius, a scholarly man who was seen asking a peasant for advice. Why would you, who are so learned, ask the peasant for advice? And Arsenius answered them, yes, I know a great deal about Latin and Greek, yet I have not learned even the alphabet of this peasant. The modern church needs a listening Abba Arsensius badly. Appropriate. And finally, because of the Papa Buono, I will just close with these things. Pope Francis. Did you see him in the news this week? Putting on headdresses. Wow. Causing people to be in tears. The whole crowd was in tears by his moving remarks. The Vatican correspondent for the British Catholic magazine Tablet, Christopher Lamb, has given us 3 points for Pope Francis. He's the Vatican representative for that magazine, Tablet. Father Jack used to know the previous one, but he was let go because he said something wrong about something, I don't know. But Jack knew him when he was over there working. They are experiences from Christopher Lamb's own experience with the Pope. He is serious about challenging us to gospel basics. Remember, he's the first Latin pope, and he comes from the Latin church, the theology of liberation, and the Latin American commitment, which comes from, as Christopher Lambs call it, an on-the-ground church. It's interesting. There's a new cardinal from Amazonia. He's from Manaus, on the Amazon River right near the equator. I remember hearing about that when they opened the opera house in Manaus. The Caruso was one of the singers, and the fountain, the water fountain in the middle of the town, had champagne in it. He's worried about the distancing of the church, mainly in English-speaking countries and the Vatican. Lamb wrote a book about this problem called The Outsider. The Pope sees himself as coming from the outside and welcoming the outsiders in, the marginalized, and clearly alienating the insiders. His lifestyle is clearly a symptom of that behavior. His dwelling, he doesn't live in the papal apartments. His morning masses, his breakfasts, even in the old days with Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict, multimillionaires, Americans who supported the Vatican would be invited to the Mass. No, Lamb says, it's often you see a gardener there or a poor homeless person. So the outsider becomes the insider. But there are many critiques of that. Pope Francis sees his entire papacy as, quote, carrying out the reforms of Vatican II. So he is the future of Vatican II. Clearly now we can understand that what some feared was an evolution, a word that we don't like in the church, but I'd rather say revolution. It's one many of you lived through before it happened, and we are all experiencing it right now. It's breathtaking. It's spirit-touched, and it's still very exciting. And for the last time, I have noticed three consistencies which have been there since the beginning, from Newman to Pope John to the spirit of now. First of all, patience. Newman, in his essay on the development of doctrine, talks about patience. Pope John, in his opening remarks, said, perhaps with patience. But another word for patience is hope. Secondly, grace. Something about the Holy Spirit, which occurs frequently. Congar writes in his diary, he says, whenever I work with the Vatican, they think they're the Holy Spirit. And surprise. Who could have ever guessed it? Who could have seen it? Who could have seen it? 1880. Who could have seen it in your childhood? In the words of R. Buckminster Fuller, with whom I began these remarks, there is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Josh. Josh put that together for me. Thanks.
So we have two microphones. Please raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. Monsignor, I have the first question, if I may. Here at the Newman Center, are we adherents to Vatican II?
We try to be. I try to be. Well, I'll quote Pope Francis. We are trying to carry out the reforms of Vatican II. We're trying it. Yes, Mary. Oh, sorry, you got to get to the microphone because we're online or something.
This is totally inspiring and wonderful, but it seems like what I'm hearing about where our church is going is a real bifurcation, where you have those of us who agree with Vatican II and those who seem to be going back to wearing veils and Latin masses and communion on the tongue. I mean, it's literally, I feel like our church is bifurcating and actually not wanting Vatican II to be our future.
Right.
Can you comment on that?
Sure. Well, it's certainly an accurate description of the mess that we're in, I think. Yeah, but I think it was always a mess. I hate to say that, but I think Hans Künger was whoever wrote that biography, calls Pius IX basically he calls them psychotic. So we always had this division, but I think there's an energy. I think of this division in the Nouvelle Théologie, it's called. There's a famous book written by Marie-Dominique Xxiii, the Dominican, who was one of the founders of the worker priests. There was their advisor, theologian, and all that. He wrote this book. It was condemned right after it was written. I have a copy of it, but my French is so bad. I don't have it. They're coming out with an English translation, but I have a copy of the book which I couldn't find. But he was condemned. He was condemned. And you know what? When Pope John called the council in 1959, de Lubac, Danielu, Chenu, Congar, Rahner, somebody said they were reading Rahner, they had all been put on the shelf and condemned. I think Congar was teaching. You go teach math somewhere in southern France. He's a great theologian. Do you know that during the Second World War, when France was occupied by the Nazis, the Vichy government was pro-Nazi, and when they wanted to, the church began to somehow support the Nazis, and they started a magazine called Témoignage Chrétien, and it was directly against the Nazi government. In fact, the one that he quotes, a famous theologian whose name I escape, and I read a book review of a book recently, and he said, I was so glad to see, I forget his name mentioned, I read him when I was a high school kid, Peter Steinfels. I read him when I was a high school kid. He touched my heart, but he was later shot by the Nazis. You know, but these were, I think it takes energy. It takes energy. It takes optimism. It takes hope. It takes hope, too, I think. You have to have hope. You have to have hope. You have to look at the sunset and realize it's going to come up tomorrow, I think. You know? I mean, they're trying to change. I mean, one of the things they had to do was to change the whole seminary's teaching. Back when we're going to send worker priests, the advisors to Cardinal Suach said, we can't have a seminary. We got to teach him more than Thomas. We have to teach him modern philosophers. We have to teach him, Marx, Oh, jeez.
Question in the front.
Shoot. Well, anyway, Mary, that's just hope. Just hope. Like Pope John, God, he was 80 years old. Yeah, somebody has another question.
Well, I have a comment. Mary, I agree with you, and sometimes those thoughts bring me down, so I have to rethink. If someone wants to have a Latin Mass or needs it, that's what they need. If someone has to go back to the future, I think it's a sign that they're becoming uncomfortable with the present and the future, and therefore they're growing in a different way. You go back to your roots when you're uncomfortable. And my mother's generation, the whole Mass was in Latin. I'm 73 years old, and I vaguely remember going to Latin Masses and never thinking anything of it. But I thought it was the best thing. But I really believe we have to move on, accept that, and keep being witnesses to what Father was talking about tonight. That's where I find my own personal hope.
I think that Newman, this 19th century was just an extraordinary century. There's look at Marx and Freud and Nietzsche and Hegel and all the great minds, Shaler, all those great minds, philosophers and all that. Boy, there was this great bubbling up. And Newman, what did he do? He went back to the tradition, and then he talks about the tradition. I think I gave a talk a few years ago about that. When he was writing the essay on the development of doctrine, when Newman was writing that, he was trying to justify the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church is present, is the real extension of what the Catholic Church is. And as he writes it, it's near the end, and he realizes I was wrong. It was like a light went on in his head. And he became a Catholic, and he became a priest. He became then later a cardinal by Leo XIII, after he had been spat on a great deal himself. But he said, here below, to live, here below is another thing. Here below, to live is to change, and to be perfect is to have changed often. Wow. People are afraid. We're afraid of change. I mean, you know, I went to the doctor yesterday for my physical. I'm changing. So anyway, I mean, I think that we have to. That's why Pope Congar mentions in his journal. He said, I talked to somebody who maybe he was a nun or was a friend of Pope John the 23rd. He said, don't worry. He knows exactly what he's doing. Don't worry about Pope John the 23rd. He's telling Congar, who's very dark and very impatient. In fact, he writes in a meditation on patience that we all read in the seminary. But he said, don't worry. But he said, I don't think so. The same is true about this guy, Francis. He's really going against those who want to bring the Latin liturgy back. Not because of the Latin liturgy, but because of the time that it represents. It represents a very conservative, reactionary, especially in the United States. United States and United Kingdom are two of the most, and the Vatican, the Curia. Poor guy gets up in the morning, as though somebody could take a shot at him, you know, poison him. Poor guy. They're really against everything you see because they don't want change. Who wants change? He lives in a 30 square meter apartment in the Vatican, in Rome. And, you know, some of these cardinals live in some of the most luxurious palaces in the city of Rome. But he says, no, I'm just not going to do that. The gospel's not about that. So I think he keeps saying it enough. Anybody else? Over here.
Father,
Yes.
it was 100 years between Vatican I and Vatican II.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a need? Do you think there might be a Vatican III in 20 years?
2062? Yeah. Probably there will be. Well, the synods are now the synod. Pope Francis believes in the synodal thing, the synodal movement.
Thank you.
So I think that's changing too. That's another change. We're on the road together. That's what synod means. Yes.
Okay, just, is this working? Yeah, I think
sure.
so. Just kind of picking up on what Mary was talking about with the bifurcation. You know, I've encountered quite a few people who it really feels like they have hostility towards Pope Francis. And
Yeah, sure.
And, you know, he seems to me really in the same vein as John the 23rd. So it's really troubling. And to add to that, I think it was a year ago that I read an article in the National Catholic Reporter that kind of stuck with me. And, you know, it kind of fits with some of the political things that are happening. And it was a meeting, I can't remember, it was some official meeting of the American bishops, but I can't quite remember all the details of the article. But from what I remember, they were tremendously influenced by these incredibly wealthy American Catholics.
Right.
I mean, really wealthy. You know, big corporate CEOs, hedge fund owners. And they were it suggested that they had a very strong influence on American bishops.
Sure.
And that American bishops were in a really weak place to bring money into the church because of the sexual abuse scandal. And so they kind of had to, now if anybody read that, and if I have it wrong, please tell me, but it just really troubled me because it fits into the whole political thing we're seeing.
I was thinking of Pius IX, you know, the church got alienated because of its behavior. And I think of those nuns that in the wreck of the Deutschland, they were coming to teach in a school in Kansas City, right? I think the German nuns. Must have been a lot of Germans out there. I'm sure they didn't know English, but anyway, yeah, sure. It's the same thing with votes. I mean, votes. I mean, I don't want to talk about the present system, but you have to have money to get elected, right? So you have to have, so the bishops, we have to have more bishops like Pope Francis is making cardinals. The United States is a little too loud and a little too, I think, a little too certain. I mean, that's the story of our history is pride. And, you know, we're the greatest nation in the world. Well, greatest nation what? Infant mortality? No. Length of life? No. You can't, those are stupid statements. Well, you know, what's so funny is when Congar talks about one of the movements after the war was Jacques Maritain, is a famous philosopher. But he belonged to this group, I forget what it was called. And they would get together, and you know, they had the greatest musician at the time belonged to that group, the greatest sculptor in France, the greatest painter in France, the greatest thinker in France. Everybody in that crowd was the greatest. There's no humility. And I think I talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Where's the humility? So I think the Napa Institute, every year they have that thing up in the Napa, which is it Kuhn? I forget the names. Do you remember those names, Bernie? In a lecture, I think. But they have this up at the Napa. Steve Bannon, what's his name? The guy, the president's man. He sucks money out of those people, you know. Yeah, but I mean what did Henry Ford say? The greatest labor-saving device is still money. The most powerful thing is money. It's unfortunate.
So you mentioned the cardinals that Pope Francis is appointing, Father.
Yeah.
Journalists who watch the Vatican have been talking about how Pope Francis has been making the church, especially at the level of the bishops, less white and yet less European. And I want to ask about that.
Yeah.
For a church that fully embraces Vatican II, that follows Pope Francis's lead, what does it look like in our future? 20 years from now, what should a post-Vatican II church look like?
I belong to a group that meets at Christmas. There's about 2 priests in the group, Father Joe Levesque from Niagara, and there's another priest that meets. And they're all these retired businessmen, most of them, a couple of judges and lawyers, most of them very, very cautious, except for 3 of us. And give your prediction for the 5 things next year. The 5 things that next year, and every one of them says, the market will go, gold will go. It's all about money. So I always say, there will be some revolutionary movement that turns up in Africa. That's when I put that. Who the hell would think of that, you know? So anyway, I do that to kind of provoke them. But who's investing in Africa now? The Chinese. I mean, incredible. It's incredible, the stuff there. And then the railroads that are moving from China to Europe. I mean, we're arguing about stupid things. Our politicians, we don't have strong, aggressive leadership. We have aggressive leadership, but it's not strong, idealistic and upbeat thinking, I think. And that's true of many of the dioceses. The Pope says that the bishops have to smell like the sheep. That's one of his early lines. We have to live the values of the gospel. And my good friend George Weigel, who wrote the biography of Pope John the 23rd, George Weigel, and Eamon Duffy, he thought it was a silly book. And I was in London a couple of years ago, and I went to a lecture that Eamon Duffy gave. And I said to him, I really appreciated your review of George Weigel's biography. And he just went, what's he ever up to, you know? But George Weigel is a conservative, very conservative. I know him very well. We were in school together at one point. He shows up at all these things, and he's very bright. I mean, it's like George Will. I mean, read George Will's column. I mean, he can write. But I think he's wrong. But anyway, but that's the thing. We have to live. That's what it means to be a human being. And that was the difference between the Jesuits. The Jesuits and the Dominicans broke because one of them said, well, this world is. The Jesuits were not focused on this world. They're focused on the life to come. The Dominicans said, no, the life. It's this life that God lives in. This is where we find God. And you see this in Gabriel Moran's remark about revelation is not Bible and tradition. No, revelation is the life of the church. So I think once you have to have a mental conversion about stuff like that. And it's the same, it's happening in Hungary. I was thinking of Magda Mikhail. She was a Hungarian. She was born in Hungary. But she's a futurist. I think we just have to keep hopeful, I guess. Yes, somebody else had a
One last question from the back.
Oh, last question.
Okay, I'll take it. If we're talking about how it's important, and we've had some discussion about how there's been bifurcation or various divisions within the church, and we have heard, certainly when Amy Coney Barrett was nominated to Supreme Court, we heard about that sect that she belonged to. We have friends who've been approached and become members who are longtime devout Catholics of these different orders that seem to almost kind of prioritize certain people as being higher level Catholics, if you will.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? I mean, it seems kind of like it's antithetical to the whole idea of Vatican II.
It's another form of Gnosticism. We have the answers. We have all the answers. And that's just not true. I mean, that's just not nobody has the answers. We live in a broken world. I mean, I really think we have to, I wished I would have known this 40 years ago, but I try to be careful about judging people's harshness. Try to understand it, maybe. Try to understand that kind of, that brokenness or something. There's all of the great writers tell us, whatever Buckminster Fuller says, we're all born geniuses, but then we get educated. And you know what he says in other things? Mothers, you'll love this, all of you mothers here. He said, what is it? A genius is a person who had a good mother. Okay, I think, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Monsignor Kearley. We do have lots of refreshments.
Oh.
Monsignor, on behalf of the committee, we'd like to offer you this thank you for your talk tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Enjoy, have refreshments. See you next year.
Thank you, everybody. Come next week. Come to the barbecue. Put this thing away here.